Hello, welcome to Track 16 Gallery. Today we have a talk between Richard Nielsen and John Collins. Their concurrent exhibitions are running through May 29th, and while I do the introduction, I'll probably show a video so you can see what they're going to be talking about. Richard and John hadn't met before these exhibitions, and when they spoke at the opening, they began a conversation that they wanted to continue. So they are going to be moderating themselves today, and so it's going to be a conversation. Richard is from Vancouver. He went to art school at Emily Carr College. John Collins is from Chicago originally and studied at the Art Institute of Chicago. Richard was introduced to me by Margaret and Christine Wertheim, who are the founders and team behind the Institute for Figuring. In 2008, we had an exhibition of their crocheted coral reef, which was a large collaborative project which is still now continuing to tour the world in different forms. I can remember seeing a number of pieces that Richard had made in the past 3 years, and I left a bit confounded from our visit. He had a lot of different things going on, and so at first I wasn't sure what I'd just seen, but these images stuck with me and I couldn't stop thinking about them, and I wanted to decode them in my own ways. He had talked about them, but there were these different sections. There were these things that were personal to him and these things that were from all over the world. So I felt like he was mining all this imagery from cameras, from friends, surveillance cameras that are public, surveillance cameras that he was convincing people to let him access to, and something strikes him about them. He's compelled to distillate it for us. In my mind, there are 3 series of works that we're showing. Some are his portraits that he's been doing during COVID for the past 13 months, and these portraits of people in their masks, most of them are up at Mass MoCA right now in Western Massachusetts in a show that'll be up through the end of the year. But then there's a series of more personal paintings that are about family and friends, that he's capturing moments, reliving moments, preserving moments. And then there are these camera pieces, these capturing pieces, these things that are, a lot of them are grabbing one moment out of a video. Sometimes it's profound, the connection between the edges of the natural world and the world of our own, and how we're invading this natural world. And sometimes it's a farce. And I find myself pondering, the farce has gone so far that it becomes our reality. It's something that's very much a part of 21st century life. The other exhibition that we have at Track 16 right now is work by John Collins. And I knew John from a much different body of work than what we're showing here. John is someone who paints with oil. He's often using salvaged materials, whether it be plaster or cardboard or linoleum tile. And I had used a few linoleum tile paintings that he had made that I liked very much in a group show a couple of years ago. And I knew he was working on this other recent series, a very devotional series, and I thought it was something that I wanted to have around me. It seemed like an earnest series that would be great to show as we were starting to emerge from this pandemic. The series is called Moonlight Graham, and it was him documenting as if he was someone working as a moonlighting, we'll say, to create a nightly drawing about baseball. And he was going to do one every single day for all of 2020 during the baseball season. And the pandemic almost thwarted this project, but he figured out other ways to keep it going until the MLB started back up, including documenting the Korean Baseball League. And it's just a lovely project to have here, and I'm happy to have them both here, and I'm going to pass it over to them. So without further ado, Richard and John.
Thank you.
Thank you,
well,
Sean.
it's a pleasure to sit here with you.
Yes.
And, I think it was interesting in our kind of quick meeting at the opening to realize that we actually had kind of a dialogue already. Seeing your work, I was immediately drawn to it as a familiar practice. And I think that's actually might be an interesting place to start, and he used the word devotional.
Yes, and it is. So, I'd love to go into that if that's where we're going. Yeah, I come from a baseball family where I think most of them are listening right now, and so I guess maybe they can chime in if I'm wrong about this, but it was such a baseball family that I almost felt like I was raised to hate all other sports. You know, my mom, I think, was mostly the leader in that charge. Football, it's a bunch of brutes just pounding into each other, and hockey, and it's baseball. Yeah. Baseball was the thing in the Collins household. And so just from a young age, that was my first love.
You know, obviously everyone who's listening and ourselves, we've gone through a pretty incredible year, devastating, and it kept everybody at home, and at least those that wanted to participate in some kind of healing. And hearing the story about your method of creating these images, first of all being your use of paper. I know that you use other materials, but we share a use of material, at least in terms of this show. Paper is something that's near and dear to my heart. You may not recognize it in the paintings, but everything is painted on paper.
These are paper mounted onto canvas.
Yeah. And
gessoed paper.
The works that you present and the work that I have, some of the portraits that I have here, was a thing that I'm assuming we were doing because we were kind of in this mode, and the devotion to see our way through this kind of crisis, being stuck at home and doing something that's kind of repetitive, something that has a mantra to it, something that maybe made us feel a little safe, maybe made us feel attached to something. The baseball community, you could be in some kind of dialogue with yourself and those folks. And I felt like, in the Mass series, I needed to create a kind of a community for myself, and wanted to reach out in this digital Zoom world to friends who were also in the same boat and experiencing this new situation. So I think the action of being at home in the studio, and I was very lucky that I have a home studio, so I could lock myself in there and not actually notice that we were stuck at home, and just repetitively paint, just making these images. And I think that there was something that was really important in that experience. And so seeing your work, I feel that you were doing something similar.
The baseball series started out as a way to justify my obsession with baseball, to be honest, and began a year earlier before the pandemic hit. And I really just thought of it as, because a lot of times I felt like I should be in my studio painting right now, and I'm watching baseball highlights on my phone. So the whole idea was, when I'm not in my studio painting, and when I'm not at work doing handyman work, at night, maybe I can do something to where I can watch these baseball highlights and then still feel like I'm getting my art practice in.
Yeah.
So it began as a quick nightly sketch of a play that I enjoyed that day.
Yeah.
And so it never really felt like part of my serious artwork.
Yeah.
It was a way to get some practice, to keep my practice regular, but it was always kind of a side enjoyment thing. I never thought of doing baseball as a serious art, really, to be honest. And
or
I didn't think of
therapy.
No, I didn't. Which it really turned into that in 2020.
Absolutely.
And it changed form in 2020. I was planning to do the whole season, and I was really upset when the pandemic hit because I only started it halfway through 2019, and I planned on doing the full 7-month baseball season every night, which I knew was going to be a kind of intense project, but in 2019 it was it was quicker. I'd come home from work, have some beers, look at videos, pick out some things, do a quick sketch. 2020 turned different. Well, first of all, when the pandemic hit, I originally thought, well, I'll just wait until games start again because the whole idea of this Moonlight Graham baseball thing was to highlight a scene in baseball that day, and I imagined myself as working for a newspaper. And I had a nightly deadline to get an image in as a comic that could be posted in the sports section of the next day's newspaper. Next to all the scores, instead of having just the numbers, there'd be a comic, an illustration of one of the plays that happened that day. There's a sports comic usually in sports pages, so I just thought of it as something like that.
Yeah.
And so when the pandemic hit, I thought, well, I'll just wait till games start again, but I had so much excitement for the project that I thought if I wait a year, and I don't even know if baseball is going to be back in a year, I don't know what's going on. So I just decided to start it with things that happened on this day in baseball history. And so that's what it became.
But it was still a daily practice.
A daily practice.
And it was still something that you did in the evening according to your rules that you've constructed for the project.
And it did, and so then it turned into, during the pandemic, it definitely became a more full-time artistic project. We actually weren't drinking at home, so that affected the way the artwork came out.
Not having alcohol?
Yes. More patience.
Right.
All of a sudden happened. I was able to kind of get more detail in the drawings, and they took more time to make too.
Yeah.
So it changed the look of them, but I was happy with that, so it did turn into a more
but we were, I think we were forced to rely on some other kind of tricks to get us to work because of what was kind of going on, and again, I think that there are some similarities to both materials and some of our background, which was just happenstance that you were chosen and I was chosen, other than what Sean was deciding to do, that make the two exhibitions kind of play off of each other. Mm-hmm. I have a history of, for the few people from Vancouver that might be attending this right now, I was part of a group of artists that did a yearly hockey show. And we would do all of us would do something devotional for the sport. And I think I think as an artist, sometimes there are certain subjects that they're not taboo, but they maybe look their nose down, or people look down their noses at it, and sports might be one of those things. Although certainly there are a lot of amazing artists over decades, if not hundreds of years, in American history alone, that did amazing sports paintings, amazing sports works. And the reliance in the early days on drawings and sketches to show what the action that was going on in a game was a kind of a needed facility. And I think again this period of time we needed a facility to kind of share some of this anxiety or joy, or kind of how it was kind of another taboo subject in a weird way. It was difficult to actually, and I didn't want to, as much as they're clearly about what was going on, I didn't also want it to be only about that.
How to approach documenting this time in a way.
And I think kind of a physical archive as a result of a period of time. It wasn't the only thing that I was working on. There were a lot of other subjects that were still important to me and still needed to kind of come out. So I did a lot of work on some family history stuff. I still continue to, not dissimilar to looking at the history of baseball, going into some of my interests in closed circuit television, available sources that are out there, that the fact that we could sit at home and watch old baseball games or look at closed circuit TV from Moscow during this time, and it still is available to us, also was really kind of remarkable, and a kind of connection to this technology that we're using right now to have this talk.
Yeah, I think oftentimes throughout the worst parts of the stay-at-home orders, my wife and I kind of lamented a little bit, like thinking, how different it would be if we didn't have just everything at our fingertips. What things could we have been sort of forced to deal with without these distractions, which I think leads us possibly to something I'm interested in that you had talked about with some of these artworks, was the United States of Amnesia. It feels like that, like it's just so easy to go anywhere and consume whatever you want, right? But it's just gone instantly too.
Masses amount of information. And that's where the good writing comes in. So we were talking before this started about, are people no longer able to or write as well as they were writing back in the day? It was the only way back then to get the information out was in good writing. Now it's just, you don't actually need writing in some cases, and it doesn't diminish the experience of something happening. It's just that it's recorded differently, and I do think it takes different muscles to see those things. So I think, exploring the vast amount of material that's out there, whether it's, I watch the hockey highlights every night at home, and that's all instantaneously available. But you had talked about the going through and looking at the history that kind of sparked this one. You would make the drawings anyhow.
I wouldn't have been able to do that without that resource.
And you finding the images that are available, and it's a kind of remarkable time. And the last major pandemic in this country and the world was 100 years ago. And I'm sure there was a baseball season. I'm sure they played hockey somewhere.
This was the only time a baseball season was interrupted due to pandemic. They played through World War I. They played through the influenza pandemic. So this was us.
So when you were taking this, the kind of concept of this started before everything shut down, and I know that you work with other materials that sort of relate to your experience as, building things and doing handyman work and bringing those materials. You also turned some of these into books.
Yes.
And the idea that a book and a drawing and a painting are going to be the materials that will probably outlast a lot of the digital material that we're using as our source material. Unless they're committed to film somewhere in someone's closet, a lot of this digital material might disappear.
And then that's interesting because possibly artists do have a responsibility to record and document these things while we have that information available.
Yeah, I think
one of my early influences, I've always been fascinated with documentation because one of my early influences was this book called How the Irish Saved Civilization, and I'm of Irish descent, so I was like, oh cool, my people saved civilization, how'd they do that? But apparently so many writings in the Roman Empire were destroyed when the Roman Empire fell, just completely lost. But supposedly a bunch of Irish monks huddled away in the corner of some island that no one cared about, took all this time to actually physically write down and record all of these books by hand. And these books would have been lost forever if not that they had been recorded by these Irish monks. And so, in a sense, that's what we're doing. If we're taking this information that's just available to us and we can record it in a tangible thing, which that's another thing, NFTs and, where's the value in a tangible object? But that's I think that's important.
I do too. And I think they function on many levels. So they can be part of an archive. They can be something that sort of illustrates or maintains a idea for other future populations. But then they can also be interesting at the moment too, so they can have connections to whether it's political or sociological or artistic references that speak right now. So they can hang in or be shown in a gallery or some sort of institution and have many kind of levels that they can kind of function at, and which makes me a little leery of any time that anybody might propose that a subject matter isn't good enough for the arts. So when you make work about sports, again, the guilty pleasure of making work that is all about you, or not in a selfish way, but in a way of describing you.
It's what you know best, so it's what you can show best. And there's an honesty to that. And I think the honesty, genuine.
It's genuine, it's honest, and as artists we make our best. I think we make our best work when we are honest and generous, and when we do offer something that is actually a part of us. And I stopped painting for a long time. I stopped painting for 12 years, and was inspired to take up painting again a few years back when Lauren and I built 2 studios in Topanga, and I didn't know what to do in the studio, and when I realized I was going to kind of start painting again, I felt it was only going to be for me. So I was only going to make paintings that I wanted to see. So I delved into all of my interests, whatever they are, and guilty pleasures sitting on my computer following the YouTube rabbit holes lead me to all kinds of interesting things. And I think that honesty in who we are is the foundation for kind of good and interesting work. And I think it was very interesting what Sean was saying in the introduction. You don't always know what it is that draws you to it. So it may not be the subject of baseball that's interesting. It may actually be, one of the things that draws me to your work is that repetition, the ability to sit there every day and make the devotional drawing. I love the idea that it's because you have a fantasy deadline as working for a newspaper. I had kind of a self-imposed desire and deadline to paint my community. I felt it was really actually, I wasn't under a pressure, but I felt it was my kind of duty to round my friends up and round my colleagues up and have them together, have us together. I think we're, what you were just saying about this technology being available to us, and, I can't imagine what it was like in other times when we had the lockdown, because we have been able to be quite communal.
Yes.
Whether it's Zoom or FaceTime or things.
You could not have rounded up portraits, selfies of all your friends. In other times. You'd have to get together in person. And so these are all portraits of people wearing their masks, and you're getting that sense of who they are as an individual based on what's on their masks. And that's an interesting idea.
And I think solidarity, I think there's solidarity in repetition in a weird way. There's solidarity in all of us coming together to weather something, to kind of endure something, and then sort of like, I don't know if you felt this way, but having the opportunity to put all this work up at the end of, or what maybe, hopefully, fingers crossed, is the end, nearing the end of this pandemic.
We'll see.
It felt like kind of coming out of something. I felt a real kind of sense of positiveness, seeing the work up and even having sort of limited interactions with people at safe social distances. It was kind of exciting. It's kind of new.
It is. Just when we took our masks off just now to do this talk, it's crazy that's not how I imagined the rest of your face to
I know, it's weird.
But it's great, and hopefully that things can kind of keep progressing here with this. For as far as seeing my work up, it's pretty surreal. I don't think even a month before, maybe 6 weeks before the opening, I don't really think I thought it was going to happen. They were just going to be these great little things I had a collection of in these books that I made. They were all just in books, and it was just about 3 weeks before the opening, kind of heard that Sean wanted to hang them, and so it was, it all happened really fast, and it was just amazing to see them on a wall like that displayed.
I think that surprise of that this was maybe going to happen and it was a possibility was...
and especially with what it started out as kind of a thing that I didn't even know if I wanted my art world people to see me doing it, you know, like,
Yeah.
oh, you're gonna just do a documentational baseball drawing every night.
Well, and there's a lot of people that still haven't been, you know, either for a lot of really good reasons that are not able to come and see the work and, you know, and participate on a, you know, I still haven't been to Mass MoCA's to see those paintings hung. And so another fabulous experience was walking in and seeing the group of four hanging together, where all of a sudden I could see the other 40, 45. It made it tangible and real, and the material, because you know, we spend a lot of time with these things really close, and I imagine, you know, working on 8x10, they're sitting on your lap or on a table, and you're really, really close to them.
Yeah.
You know, I stand in my little teeny beautiful studio, and I'm really close to them all the time. We have these, and most artists have this experience of a very intimate experience with them, and that you then release them. And it was kind of surreal. It was kind of surreal, you know. We've been participating in this before COVID. Why should this all of a sudden sort of be so different? But it somehow feels different.
So, just recently, within the last 2 years, you said, started kind of painting again. Is that what?
Yeah, about 3 years. 3 years.
And the time that you painted previously, were you working with these same materials? This is all acrylic?
No, before I stopped painting, I was working as I worked on canvas in a maybe, I don't think necessarily more traditional way. I actually was a lot more fugitive. Raw canvas with oil paint and house paint, and, you know, it was abstraction, a little bit of figuration, nonsensical objects mixed in. You know, worked that way for quite a long time. I think probably almost since the time I graduated from art school. Actually, my grad show in art school, because I graduated in printmaking, but I didn't want to do a printmaking show. I wanted to do a painting show. I didn't have painting materials, so my grad show was all done on paper using printmaking materials to draw with. And then as soon as I left school, I got canvases and made stretcher bars and went down that road for a really long time. I didn't want to go back there. When I started painting, I didn't want the fumes or the yuck or the duration it takes for oil to dry. I wanted it to be easy for me.
I think I can see your printmaking influence in your approach to painting. The different ways you use materials, the different materials you use. I mean, the way the spray paint. It reminds me of like etching techniques. Aquatint.
Absolutely, aquatint and those kind of surfaces.
Just the way you think about creating a tone.
I walk in and I look at yours and I'm like, oh, these would be good lithos, you know. I was like, oh, he's all those washes is fantastic. It's so exciting, you know. You can't get the printmaker out of you, you know. I think you know, I had a print shop in Chinatown called Untitled Prints and Editions, and I temporarily closed it down. Mostly because of skyrocketing rent in Los Angeles, for all of you that can do anything about it. And then, you know, the pandemic hit and everything was in storage, and I'm not necessarily sure I feel inclined to start it back up, just because I think that I've discovered a way of using a lot of those techniques in this work. I don't feel like I need to have kind of a second life in a way and do printmaking on the side.
So your art practice is a continuation of what we see here in this show. Essentially, like, this is a direction that's really fun and fulfills
absolutely
that inside you.
That I would say it's the funny bone.
That's great.
But it's more. I have some wonderful relationships with artists that that discussion and dialogue around art making is really, really deep. And I felt, again, the reason I think we're doing this way is that I felt the very same thing. I talked for you for 15 minutes and I felt, there's a deep dialogue about an art making practice. And I recognize it in your art, and then I also in talking to you since with your interests in materials and other ways of doing things. So whether it's cardboard and found objects from your life.
That's a very enjoyable thing for me is taking kind of even like debris from like stucco that has fallen off someone's garage, and I had to remove the old stucco and patch it up, and finding really cool, oddly shaped pieces of stucco that you can then gesso and paint on.
Yeah.
It's just super enjoyable to feel the material that I'm so familiar with, which is oil painting, which is what I studied in art school 20 years ago. And
where did you go to school?
The Art Institute of Chicago.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. I went to Emily Carr in Vancouver, kind of a Canadian, I would call it a regional art school. People might not appreciate that, but certainly the Art Institute has an amazing reputation.
I just did undergrad only.
Yeah.
From what I learned later, the amazing reputation is mostly upon the grad program.
Yeah.
But it was an awesome experience. Some unbelievable lessons learned. Teachers that trained with Hans Hofmann back in the day,
course, yeah.
that I'm learning,
painting
secondhand from that, and irreplaceable lessons. And but I really knew I wanted to be an oil painter. So the cool thing about the Art Institute at the time, I don't know if it still works that way, is you didn't have to decide on a program and follow a certain set of class criteria. Once you got through what was called the first year program, which was completely regimented, you had to take all of these classes. Once you got through that, you could take any class in the whole school. So you could take a painting class, and you could take a sculpture class, and you could take a printmaking class, all in the same semester. So if you wanted to choose a certain path to really study, you could, or if you wanted to try to learn all different things, you could, and once you amassed enough credit hours, you just could graduate.
Yeah.
It was very open, and that was cool.
But don't you think that isn't that amazing? You're in an institution, and I had some lovely teachers, but you were part of this storied institution that sort of left a different kind of mark. A mark like a historical mark. I'm very envious of being connected to Hans Hofmann. That's talk about that. It may be wrong. The history may be skewed, and it probably is. But still,
Still, it's. You could feel the steeped knowledge.
Sure.
Particularly, I'm talking about one teacher named Betsy Ruprecht. Just this fantastic old woman, long white hair, but just this super cool lady, teaching a drawing class, charcoal drawing. But it's hard to describe, I guess, and maybe even remember, since it was 20 years back, but you could just feel the so much knowledge, and there was never enough time like to keep wanting to hear stories and hear her ideas about mark making.
Yeah.
It was just really sad when that class ended.
So do you have people like that now?
Now, no, I don't. You mean mentors or something?
Not so much mentors, but just like again, colleagues in your community that sort of you're able to do that.
No, I don't think I do now. At the moment, no. The institution of schools is just such a valuable experience to have all those resources at hand, from the teachers to the supplies to.
I think too that was a thing. You finish it and then you kind of are shuttered off, and depends on your discipline, of course. But back when we were in school, there wasn't a lot of. There was interdisciplinary, but there wasn't social practice. There wasn't all these other, variety of engagements with a bigger audience or a bigger set of colleagues.
Yeah, it doesn't really prepare you to go out into the world and be an artist.
No.
It shows you the techniques you can use if you have the tools, if you have the resources, but.
It has to be pretty. It's a pretty conscious thing that you have to do to maintain that kind of engagement.
Yes.
And to seek out the other voices or
I guess that's where like just reading might come into play. Hello. Hello. Who's calling? I think we should answer.
Yeah, I think we should answer it.
Sounds important.
No, I do think that's,
Hans Hoffman.
Hans Hoffman. The thing about starting the painting back up again was very much about that. Was very much about wanting to. I have been so lucky in the last, more than a decade to be involved in a fabulous love relationship with my partner Lauren Bond, but also as a collaborative process and project, and that has opened up a whole range of possibilities that I don't think I would have. I certainly wouldn't have had working on my own, and the broadness of those experiences feed into this particular artwork or projects, and the statement that I made to myself to not want to paint anything other than things that I want to see is not a flippant subject, or it's not a flippant statement. It's the core of my engagement in working with this 2D material. It has to exude that, and it has to be connected to bigger relationships and ideas just beyond your studio. And so I mentioned that I had been part of a hockey group, which was again another kind of social engagement with people to develop these ideas. And walking in, seeing your work, I was reminded of that. There was a lot of joy in seeing, both in subject matter, but also in the sophistication and implication that your work implies into a much, much bigger historical understanding of an art making practice. And it made me really hopeful to see the work that you were making there. And on our short discussion that first day, I felt that there's another member of the community, and it brings these members of the community together. I find that to be why we're doing this, besides self-expression.
Yeah.
Complex.
And I think that's where it gets back to, you have to enjoy it. It has to come from a place that you know. Or it has the risk of seeming a little contrived.
Yeah.
And that's been something that I've been kind of like struggling with in my own non-baseball art making, And maybe it's an issue of like trying not to separate those things so much as I have been in the past.
Yeah.
But for me, it's always, my working with materials that I salvage from handyman jobs I dislike all of the incredible waste in the world today. And so I see it first and foremost in my handyman jobs when I'm assembling furniture for a client, and all of this furniture comes in all of these cardboard boxes and all of this styrofoam, and at the end, it's got to get rid of somehow, and there's just so much trash always.
Yeah.
And so that's where that started, is kind of like if something can be reused at least once and turned into something else, it saves it a little bit. It seems like something that is futile in a way, but it seems like something that is important as well and worthwhile.
Yeah.
It seems like kind of the most important thing in our world moving forward is how do we figure out a way to cut down on the waste.
I think seeing works that are made on or with salvaged material, yet still can talk about that, but that's not the only thing that they talk about. I think the word futility is interesting because I want to react against that, but I also kind of agree. There is a futility to it, and maybe that's part of it. There's an economy there. As much as it's horrifying. One of the most amazing places in Los Angeles is to drive out to the dump out in Sunland. That's a whacked place. It's horrifying and wild at the same time. Oh. It's an artwork unto itself. Also, a polluter and ruins neighborhoods. Just so all these things are piled up on top of each other. And I think when you're demoing a house that seems to be perfectly good, and you're like, why are we doing this? But the client wants it done. That's kind of what you do. And to then turn that into something, that you can express. I think going back again to sort of the genesis of this project, from the printmaking, I was left with an incomplete project once, and I had 1,500 sheets of Mayfair, 23.5 by 35 inch Mayfair. And again, the question was asked, what am I going to do? And I'm like, maybe I'll start painting again. And I have all this paper. Mm-hmm. So it was sort of natural, don't waste the paper, use the paper. Mm-hmm. And it became the matrix for all of this. So I don't have to think about sizes. If I'm going to make something roughly this big, it's going to be on that size of paper. If I need to make it twice as big, it's 2 pieces of paper. If I need to make it 4, so the math goes on. I like
simplifies things.
It simplifies it,
yeah.
And there's an economy. I do remember those days after a show and, half the work, if not more, coming back from the gallery stretched. I had to figure out where was I going to store that. Painting storage became a huge, another kind of waste.
Yeah.
Guys, are you ready for a couple questions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to combine these first questions together a little bit, because they're both about being over something. So one question is, and I'll ask Richard's part, and I'll let you guys both just answer at once. So, John, are you through with the baseball images? Are you going back to oil painting? And then Richard, are you over printmaking? And do you have any desire to foster the creative spirit of everyone and provide opportunities to do so by a printmaking medium, with it being accessible to anyone? And then what would make that a palatable proposition for you? So you guys can kind of answer those. It's about like these things that you've done a lot of. How do you feel about it now? Kind of questions.
Do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. I am definitely at a transition point. I'm through with this particular baseball project. The pretending I'm working as a newspaper comic with my nightly deadline. My challenge to myself was to do the full 7-month season in 2020, and it was awesome. Like I did that. The project became something I never imagined it would, meaning the style of the paintings, I never really thought it would get there. I love the looser style that I was doing in 2019, but I also love what it turned into in 2020. But that project just became a little too labor intensive and focused on just one thing, and the same kind of issue that I'm having where I had to keep buying this notebook of paper to keep painting the baseball paintings, and to use the paper that I wanted, I had to get the 30-page book that only lasted a month. So I have 7 books that I'd have to buy.
That you were cutting up.
And I'm cutting up. and it was a super fulfilling project. But I'm ready. I'm at a transition. It feels like a little empty right now because it's over, and I'm kind of having fun with the fruits of the labor, having a show here, which is amazing. Thank you, Track 16 and Sean. But I'm looking forward to when that subsides and when it's me at home in my studio and there's nothing but what's next in front of me. And this idea, so what is next? I don't know if that was part of the question, but the baseball series as it is in the gallery, as the Moonlight Graham project, I'm moving on from. I've gotten what I needed from that, and I need something else moving forward.
And then John, Richard, you have your question in mind for
again. I just want to quickly say something. Again, going back to a conversation between you and I, this, the devotional, the repetitive, the thing that you do over and over every night. Mm-hmm. And you get to witness your own evolution in that process. You get to witness your changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not like you do a painting a month and you're working on it and you're kind of working on it, and then 3 years later you look at 8 paintings and maybe there's some evolution in there, but you can't kind of pick where it is. That stuff, I think, is fascinating. When you do things over and over again,
it has a life of its own.
Yeah.
When you
watch
just
it
have to
happen.
do it every night. There's nights
And
you
you
don't
kinda
feel like
can't
doing
stop
it.
it.
And yeah, it turned into something where I couldn't do a different style if I wanted to. It turned into this thing that I couldn't. Early on, I tried to force myself to change styles to keep it fresh, but 5-6 months into it, it was its own beast, and I just was the vehicle.
Yeah, I find that stuff really moving too, and I do. The painting the portraits was like that too. This evolution of them, and I can look at them and go, oh, I can see where I made certain changes, and I can see where certain things got exciting. But I just wanted to bring that up because we could talk about that, I think, for hours.
It was cool.
The question, I don't think the materials or the equipment will stop me thinking as a printmaker, nor do I think as if I'm practicing printmaking at a moment, or photography, which is also something that I do, that I stop being a painter. I maybe don't have access to the equipment, but I still think that way. So I don't think it ends. I don't think that project, it just changes. And I think there is a way of perpetuating both those skills and that thought process into future work, whether it is through these paintings. And I'm glad that John and others have seen some of the influences in there. And I think if you spend any time with prints, you would see it. But I don't think that that's necessary either. My journey that happens when I'm working by myself in the studio, where I'm thinking, oh, I could do that move that I used to do on a stone with the lithotripsy and grease pencil. I can do it with India ink and water, and I'll do it. So that stuff doesn't go away. It's like riding a bike in a way. You don't really think about how am I going to ride that bike again. You kind of get on it and you start pedaling, and assuming you haven't had an accident and still have some balance, you'll probably be able to do it. You may not be able to throw the ball as fast as you used to be able to throw it, but all of a sudden you put a mitt on and you just catch the ball. I think I can have a continued discussion, both with myself as a creative person and with others, on all of those subjects without ending any of them. That said, I also think focus is important too, and I feel that I've unlocked something here in the last 3 years, and I'm really excited to be back to it, and I feel really lucky. I feel lucky to have been allowed back into that part of me, or this part of the world, to continue on the adventure. I think it's just an adventure. Life is a bunch of weird things that happen, and you either resist them or you go with them. So, I think it will be with me.
Next question is, I'll be curious. So, how do you both beckon the muse when the muse is stubborn and taking a long nap?
I have many muses. I just switch, There's always a muse. I don't know. That's a interesting thing. I feel really lucky because I have many kind of things going on that never do I not have something that interests me.
How do I beckon the muse when the muse is stubborn
And taking a long nap.
And taking a long nap.
Taking a long nap. Well, that seems to be sort of where I am at right now. It's just, you know, so, I mean, I think for me it's go back to the basics. Like, I feel this strong urge to get back to oil paints, just the thing that I know best. And I'm really excited for that time to happen because of what I learned using ink, which I never used until this intensive project, and I'd never worked even really in watercolor at all, so learning to use a super wet brush and
watercolor's hard.
And knowing sort of which things to do first in order to get the effects you need. And I mean, I'm really looking forward to
They didn't teach us watercolor in school.
No, they didn't.
They looked down their noses at it.
Yes.
So we were like, you know, I go out now and sit by the Owens River with my, you know, what I think is a watercolor set and some water and I try and water, and I realize I have no idea what that is.
Well,
I'm impressed with what you've done. I think they're incredible.
One of my main muses for that project was my dad. He was fantastic watercolor. Well, he was just fantastic at watercolors, and I never even tried them. But remembering what he would talk about with watercolors, and when he would go to galleries and see other people's watercolors, and he'd be like, no, you know, it has to be wet, it has to be fluid, you know, like using your medium properly, using it at what it does best instead of fighting with it. So hearing his words, you know, being like, okay, you got to learn how to work with the fluidity of it and have it feel loose and have it do what it does. You know, and my dad also, he passed in 2014. I'm always missing him, but I'm always hearing, he was beside me when I was doing these, because late in his life, in the 2000s, in the late 2000s, during his retirement, he did a super intensive baseball art watercolor series.
Really?
And he got a gallery show in Illinois.
That's cool.
Yeah, with that work, and sold some of those, and that was one of my inspirations for this project. So, you know, I'm moving on from that muse, and gonna try to like go back to my other muse, which I think is like the Van Gogh, like oil paintings, like color, like. And that's intimidating to me. I'm impressed with the way you work with color. Yeah, Hans Hoffman. Because I don't really feel like I have that grasp on color yet, and that's where
color's weird.
Yeah,
colors. Yeah, you would think that I think most people would think that by the time we're sitting here that we get it, but it's not. It's like, what the hell? I just want to shout out to a watercolorist that I know is, or I hope is watching, Cheryl Hamilton. I've watched her over the years work with watercolor, and she does understand it. So, you know, I should probably ask some questions to her afterwards. Hopefully she's on.
I have another question. John, it's awesome the way you captured the ball player's form in your still images, very dynamic plays. You can really see how the body works to execute these feats of athleticism, especially when looking at your representations of batters. Do you feel like you learned anything about Major League hitters' form from studying so many at-bats in freeze-frame detail, or maybe your pre-existing knowledge of baseball and experience playing baseball better enabled you to capture the specific body language of the players?
I think it more heavily relied on my experience playing and my just entire life loving and watching, like, this has been brainwashed into me, for lack of a more positive term. These are just things I know so intimately well, from doing it to being inundated with the imagery my whole life, from as early as I can remember. So I credit that to just actually really loving baseball, from deep within me.
I think we're about like a little over an hour in. I was thinking that when you guys are done, I'm gonna do a walkthrough of the show. I'm gonna switch over, so if the audience is patient for a sec, I'll switch over to the my phone, and I can kind of give a walkthrough of the show so people can see it.
Okay, that sounds good.
Cool.
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Oh, and one last question. Maybe you can tie this into a closeout. If you guys have anything else to say, again, kind of for John. Did the audience respond more and different and how to your baseball content? So, like, what's it like having a response to that kind of work?
I think one of the most enjoyable and surprising things that came out of it was how many people said they actually don't like baseball at all. But yeah, just never liked it, and that really just enjoyed looking at these paintings, and that's also I credit to just what we were talking about earlier about it. If you are passionate about what you're showing, then it will read.
Yeah, I think so.
And I think that's a really important, one of the important lessons I've learned from doing this project is I gotta, in future works, I gotta talk about what's really, what I feel, and what's important, so yeah, those reactions were the most rewarding, I think. Yeah.
Well, I would say that, the form that happens in a image, the athletic form, I think about Thomas Hart Benton and the way he painted American sort of Americana. Where it moves out of the figuration that identifies the action, so the baseball player is swinging, to something that actually starts to relate to other kinds of image reading. So the form and the shape of the way, and for me it's more of the way somebody might, or the way that you draw a picture. Because there's an S shape. So there's these comforting shapes, a bat or two to a certain degree. And we're drawn to kind of shapes that, that elicit discomfort or anxiety or comfort and joy or safety or love or, and I think the elegance of the way that someone renders a human figure in action. I think the breaking down of the action. You think about nude descending a staircase, and the way that that's broken down, and it's no longer elegant. It's actually about the movement. But when you think, that's based on Muybridge, but Muybridge was taking single shots of actually incredibly elegant movements. And I think he one of them, Muybridge or the other dude, whatever his name was, did they not do some baseball players?
I'm not familiar.
They did wrestlers, they did runners. So anyway, there's some kind of connection to it that transcends the sportness of it and becomes about the beauty of it.
It does. And it's also, I think, why some people possibly look down upon doing sport artwork is that it has a built-in iconography already.
Yeah.
You know, so it can be a cheat in a way, or it's like doing dog portraits. You know what I mean? It's like it's a cheat in that sense, but it's also how does an image like nude descending a staircase become iconographic? You know, sport imagery can become iconographic a little simpler possibly, but it's
but maybe because of the challenge of it, it's actually harder. You know, for it to again transcend its own existence.
That's a good point.
Its own meaning, so that it becomes actually quite difficult for it to have authority in that way, and not just be a baseball image, or not just be, a landscape is like that. Horrible horse paintings are like that. There's a whole range of subject matter that has the type of limitations that, if you endeavor in it, actually make them harder.
That's a good point.
I think portrait painting is that way too. I think portrait painting has a type of understanding language around it that when you start to ask it to do other things, it makes it difficult. Although, there's been a lot of people that have done that, so I think the entry point is easier in. But there, these again, this kind of subject that people look down their noses at, and maybe that's the wrong word, because I don't know if that's actually entirely the truth. But pop imagery, which can be seen as insipid and thin, also has incredible depths of cultural information in it, and if you can extract that and separate it from the simplistic view of it, you end up with something that's more challenging and maybe more descriptive of the situation that we find ourselves in. And I think that that's our job. I think that's one of our jobs.
I like that. Yeah.
Maybe it's not a job. Maybe it's something else. But
we are image makers, and that's what I think we're all searching for. Is how
to image makers. That's a
T-shirt. An image that captures people's imaginations and really is.
I like that.
That's the goal, I think, in a way.
We are image makers.
Let's
do that. Who did Nixon shake hands with at the World's Fair? Was it Brezhnev? Anyway, let's shake hands.
Okay. The handshake